Um, for me, last week, anyone that happened to watch any parts of the coding live stream or the replay, um, hopefully you understood what was going on there. If not, we're going to talk about it real quick, trying to do a high level overview of what was done, and I'm sure anyone that did watch the coding live stream was kind of bored. There was a lot of thinking this weekend. Not so much coding. I'm hoping we can change that this weekend. I'm hoping to have a little bit more coding time because I've done a lot of the thinking. So we will go ahead and this is gonna be pretty much coding only because there really isn't much to show. So this is the date time component. Anyone that's watched any of my streams before has seen it. This is pretty much the basic, the main component. When you're breaking down a headless component, you have to really think about all of the other pieces that need to be in there, how they need to be converted to a headless component. It's not really always a one-to-one conversion. Obviously you're going to need the headless component for the date component, but a good example of what I'm talking about not being a one-to-one conversion. This is the basics. A lot of this will get moved, and some of it already has. Will get moved to the actual headless component. The part I'm talking about, though, is down here. Let's just find where I'm at. It's this right here. It's the render selector piece. So the render selector piece, each one of these is a different selector. This one is the main day selector. This is the one where the calendar component is contained. So when you're on the actual selecting a day, the calendar component comes up, and that's this. Then there's a separate selector for months, a separate selector for years. There's a time selector, as I've shown before in some of my showcases, and there's a range selector, which is two calendars side by side. Each one of these, I was initially thinking that each one of these would have to be its own headless component, but they all have basically the same um, properties for the most part. Some of them more the properties are set than others, but in the end, they pretty much have the same properties. So what I've done is each one of these is combined into a single headless component. And I believe I called that, hang on here, I've got it over here, date time. It's called the date time selector component. That really doesn't have a lot of work in it right now. Oh, it has no work in it. I've done the props is what I've done. So this is where I ended on the weekend, is just getting all the available props into there by going through the different components and having all the possible props. Ones that are always set, which yeah, sometimes some of those may end up getting made optional as well. But yeah, that'll happen as we go through the actual component. The majority of the work done was done in the actual date time component. So we'll start with the props for the date time component. Um, so yeah, we got the actual date time props. This is coming from the pieces of the date time component that aren't specific to visual pieces of the interface, but are actually usable actually have some kind of code implication in them. So that's all of these pieces, or pieces that need to get passed through the headless component for decisions in the UI to be made. So yeah, because I mean, some of these, like calendar icon position, is definitely a very visual component, but it's up to the user to decide how to use that when they're actually using the headless component. So it needs to get passed through so that the user can say, okay, so they can say, oh, well, this thing is telling us that we want the calendar icon position to be on the left or on the right. So even though, like I said, it has no real bearing in the actual code of the headless component, it still needs to be given by the user so that we can know where we want to render those certain things. So yeah, when you're thinking about things like that, when you're working on things like that, you've got to sit down and really think. And that's, like I said, I doubt many of you stayed on the live stream for too long because it wasn't very eventful. But the reason it wasn't very eventful was because there was a lot of thinking going on. I was having to say, okay, what needs to go, what needs to get put into the headless component, what needs to stay as a visual only property of the main component. So it's a lot of that kind of work. I'll kind of jump into the showcase here of what this is. This is basically a pared down version of what you'll see in the date time component itself. So we'll go back up here, and you see there's there's a bit more in the way of properties, of passable properties here. So yeah, a bit smaller. If we scroll upward, you can kind of see. So we've started adding pieces in here to try and make them more headless related. Still brought in a lot of the code from the use effects. Like I said, a lot of that code is going to come in because a lot of that code is the actual guts of the working piece here. Let's see if we can actually get to anything real. A lot of this just setting up stuff. Determining which date selector. This is the one of the things that came through not too long ago, when we needed to add that extra feature for the feature that was requested at work, the ability to change the selector on the fly. So that's where this guy came from. So this is getting moved over because that's definitely part of that, making the decision as to which selector shows up at any given time. And then we have, like I said, most of this is coming directly from the date component. Once again, these are things that you've got to start thinking of how they work. Here's what I'm talking about. The on-focus event's probably a pretty good one, because my current on-focus event, if I can find it here, does this. So we've got set drop-down element as part of it. Now it has set selector open, but it doesn't have set drop-down element. Set drop-down element is a visual-only piece of this. So we're going to have to work out how that needs to work, because the on-focus still needs to set this guy for us. So we still need to fire this guy when on-focus is fired. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to hook up to that as part of the headless component. So the headless component will give us back the on-focus event for us to call and things like that. And so we're going to have to do some implementation, and probably what we'll end up doing is this method will stay here. It will set its own drop down element, and then it'll call the headless components on focus event and let it set up its piece, let it do its piece. And that's probably how a lot of these things are going to work. So some of these things, they're going to have to stay in the actual regular component, because they actually set up some UI elements that the headless component shouldn't really know about. And that's a lot of where the thinking involved comes in, because you got to sit there and think, okay, what is a headless component? We've gone through this before. A headless component is basically a component without major UI elements in it. Yes, there are still small pieces of markup in there and that kind of stuff, but you want to leave a lot of the UI out. That way you're focusing solely on the actual internal guts, the internal workings of the component, and leave the more visual aspects of that component to the end user. So that's always, whenever I'm doing these conversions, that's why there's a lot more thinking than there is coding, because I've already got the component here. I've got the component, I've got it working. I know this works. So it's not something that I'm having to create it from scratch. Creating from scratch would be a different story. Once we get this conversion done, then we're going to end up having to create things from scratch. Then there'll be a lot more of that kind of work. It won't be so much pulling code over and figuring out what stays and what goes and how, and kind of manipulating all of the code and all that kind of stuff like you're seeing now. Probably one of the major components that's going to be done after this is going to be a drop-down component. Another component that's going to be done after this is I'm going to create probably the one right after this one, and I'm not even sure if I'll finish the headless conversion ones, or if I'll leave the smaller headless conversion ones to the rest of the team. I'm looking to create a scheduler component, which is going to take the calendar headless component and create a bigger calendar component, so that we can actually use it to store schedules and things like that. But we still need the date time capabilities of it, the ability to shift from month to month and things like that, and to show current month and all that stuff like the calendar component already does. But then give me the ability to add extra features to it, which would be, actually for a day, add individual pieces on there to show dates and times and all that. That's going to be kind of, that's another reason why I did this headless component now, because the idea came up that I would like to have a scheduler component created. It's going to be for me, and actually use that. So that's why this is being done, also to flesh out the individual pieces, like I've said, to try to get some of the more complex pieces of the headless architecture finished once and for all. So yeah, we've got, like I said, a lot of these things are just mostly copies, mostly pastes. All of these came from the date time component for the most part. Need to fix those there. They haven't been hooked up yet. That's why you're seeing them all in red here. All of these were copied over, but they aren't really needed per se. Although I just realized that's not really what I want to do. The date selection state needs to change this here. Previously, this wasn't using use memo, but it is now. By the way, I do know that React 19 is coming, and that is something that's, when I see things like this that are coming into my thought process, is how it's going to work with React 19. As part of this component right here, as part of this task, I'm going to be upgraded to 18.3.1, which I want to thank someone at my full-time job for mentioning this. 18.3.1 has pieces in it that kind of throw warnings and things of that nature that get you ready to convert to React 19. I'm not going to convert to React 19 right away, because I think it would stall our progress and possibly cause bugs and issues and things like that we're going to have to work through. So instead, what I will do is upgrade to React 18.3.1. I think it's 18.3.1. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. Actually, it's not that. It's right here. Yeah, 18.3.1. So, so they can give me the warnings, and we can try to work through some of these things right now, maybe try to eliminate some of these warnings as we go, try to build it more for the whole React compiler stuff that's coming up here very soon. And then once we do an official release, probably the next version release we do will probably be converting to React 19. So hopefully we'll have gotten most of these things out of the way by then, convert to React 19, and it should be as smooth as possible to get through, and as few bugs as possible. So that's the goal. And then here's where I ended, was bringing in the headless base. And so headless base, of course, is the basic component for any headless component. And I've gone through the whole headless architecture. If you want to see it, you can go back through some of my previous live streams to see how that headless architecture works. I'm working on what render props need to come out. I'm willing to bet that a good number of the properties being passed in will probably also be passed out. Hence, this is why I called it render props, and I extended the date time props. A lot of these coming in are pretty much pass-throughs for the most part, like I've said. Some of them will have actual implications within the component itself, but a good number of them are just straight pass-through, time constraints, icon, well, maybe not time constraint, but definitely icon position, I think date selection, things like that. These actually do have usages in there. They are actually going to be used to determine if a date is valid or not, that kind of stuff. Hang on a second here. So that's pretty much where we are. Let's see how we're doing here on time. Okay, about 15 minutes. That's a good one. So yeah. Basically, I think that's pretty much where I was. I did show that, I was working on the selector. I talked about the ideas of how I was going to work the selector. The calendar component, I can go through that real quick just to show what I'll probably do with that. The calendar component itself is pretty interesting. It basically does all the work of the calendar. So there's not going to be much, as you can see. There's already not a lot of properties here. I'd like to, I don't know, we'll wait and see about some of these things, like the dispatcher. I'm not entirely sure how if we're going to keep it. We have kept it so far. So far, we have kept the whole reducer concept within the headless component. So we probably will stay with that. But yeah, a lot of this will probably get brought over because a good amount of this outside of the actual rendering is used internally to do a lot of the uh, date calculations and all of those kinds of things. Um, let's see, what else can we talk about? But yeah, although that is going to be interesting. Well, the template stuff will stay into the component itself because the template modifies the UI basically. So we won't be doing that. That won't be coming to the headless component, but just about everything else except for the actual UI portion of it will end up coming. Probably end up eventually even bringing the functions, the date time functions, which are these guys here. These are the ones that this is what does a vast majority of the work of getting us. That's a lot there. Basically, trying to figure out the locale name. Yeah, basically, this is what is this guy called again? What's a DataFNS? This is DataFNS. So DataFNS does this thing where if there isn't a change from the base locale, DataFNS doesn't include it. A good example. DataFNS has EN for English, of course, and now in English, if those of you who don't know, there's multiple locales in English. There's the U.S. English, which is usually, I think that's the base when they say EN, even though I believe that you can say EN-US. There's EN-US, EN-GB, ENAU, ENNZ, ENCA, and there's even other countries that speak English in their country that isn't strictly an English-speaking country, but those are 5 right there. Actually, let's see. It wouldn't be hard to find that. And so, there it is right here. So, yeah, AUCAGB, IE. I forgot about Ireland. I think this is India. IN, New Zealand, US. Oh, ZA is China, if I'm right. So, like I said, if in DataFNS, if basically there is nothing that changes from the default locale, DataFNS won't do anything with it. So this is meant to go in and attempt to try and pull the right kind of things down. In English case, as you can see, each one of them actually does have its own locale. But in some of these, you'll notice like BG is just BG. I don't know what BG is actually. CADE. This is German here. So there's the basic German, and then I don't know what AT is, but then there's German in whatever locale AT is. But there's a number of other places where German is spoken as well that just goes with the basic default in German. So that's where this kind of thing comes in, because you might get DEDE, for example, and I think that's right. I think the German in Germany is DE dash capital DE, but it's the basic, so it just defaults to DE. So only the ones that change end up in this, and that's why we've got this really nasty switch case here. Basically, it's kind of mapped to DataFNS so that when we're saying get the locale, because I was noticing that I would just take the user's locale from the browser, pass it to this guy, and then I would get these errors, these really weird errors every once in a while whenever I was testing out different locales. Oh, it wasn't found. This file wasn't found. I'm like, what do you mean this file wasn't found? I know it's a valid locale. I set it within my browser. It's because of that reason. That's when I went in there and I dug in and I had to figure out, oh, that's the issue. The issue is DataFNS only includes a locale if it changes from the base locale. So that's when you had to go through by hand and quite literally just go through. And there's I think there's 70 or 80 of them in there, and go through line by line by line and just say, okay, well, here's these. And then but it wasn't just that. I had to go through the individual locales that were available too, which just makes it that much more fun. So yeah, I had to go through the individual locales and say, okay, well, here's all the locales, and here's the ones that it actually uses. And, oh man, what a nightmare that was putting together. This has been this component has truly been a labor of love. This was the first component that I did in the library, and I can understand why a lot of component libraries do not include a date time anymore. It's a constant moving target, and it's very difficult to get right. It takes a lot of work to get done. This has been the majority of the focus. As you can see, a lot of these functions here are all about calculating things, and not just calculating things, but calculating them in a way that they can be displayed in a proper format. Building arrays of arrays, like the default matrix here. It's an array of an array. It's an array of an array. So each row then gets dates. Also, you got to remember, if you remember the calendar component, where the first date falls in the month, we have to backfill previous dates, and when the last day falls, we have to pre-fill the dates from the next month to fill out the calendar, because that's the way a lot of calendars do it. If it doesn't fall within those times, the only place that I didn't do that at was in the date range component. It was just too it was a little too complex to make that work in that case. I probably do need to go back and make it look the same, but you know, it's not that big of a deal. And the problem with that was that's what the problem was in doing the date range, because you would want to backfill the previous month into the next month. So the month on the right hand side would end up getting backfilled with the dates from the left hand side, which would just be really screwy if you think about it. You'd end up with on this side, you'd end up with months from the previous month, and on that side, you'd end up months from the month before. It would just be it'd be a mess. So for the date range, we left that whole concept out, and we made it just each one only had the dates from its month, and that's all there was to it. Which was fun in and of itself, because we built that and then we had to unbuild it. So, but the fun of building a date component, a date component as a major part of a library. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to show for here. We'll go ahead and we'll just unshare and kind of finish this out. Yeah. I hope you learned a little bit at least. I'm hoping we'll see how this weekend goes. I have been pushing it pretty hard in a lot of areas. This will be released on Saturday, but I'll go ahead and talk about the space that we have on Thursday here. So I'm recording this today on Thursday, and I've got a space tonight. And last night, I ended up doing another space with someone else, which is a good conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation, but that pushed me to about 1:30 in the morning. Surprisingly, I still have energy to do stuff and to talk about this, and I'm fully in my faculty. So it amazes me what does and doesn't wear me out. So I'm pretty happy about being able to do this today and get this out. So I hope we start getting more and more people following this. Ask questions, please. I don't just do this to hear myself talk. I like to do this for people to learn. And if you got questions about what is a headless component, I have gone through that in one of my previous live streams. I've talked about what a headless component is and why I felt it was important for us to convert the library to using them, and eventually to release another library strictly with headless components. I did talk about that, but if you can't find it, I understand. I post a lot, so I'm sure it's buried in there on X. You can find it on LinkedIn, probably a lot easier. I post a lot less there. Most of my posts revolve around the live streams and some of the stuff I'm doing. So you can probably find the previous streams there a lot easier than you could anywhere else. So ask questions. I don't have a problem with that. DM me or just post something to me. I'd be happy to discuss it publicly, privately. I'm not really all that concerned with how it goes. Yeah. Hopefully I see you guys later. Hopefully I talk to many of you, and I hope this is at least somewhat educational. Like I said, there'll probably be a lot more to talk about when I can actually show something. That's where I'm hoping to get to, is something visual where I can say, here's what we've done. Here's the final result. Kind of like what I did with the checkbox, where you actually could see what I was doing and not just see the code, but see the actual piece and show how it still works. And I'm hoping it turns out as good as the checkbox, because the checkbox, I think, I don't want to say it was faster, but it definitely, the number of renders was way down. I mean, it only had 2 renders, which is what it would normally have. It would have the the prop update, the state update, which is about the best you can hope for in React. Two renders when a prop changes a piece of state is about the best you can hope for. And that's what I'm hoping to get here. I'm hoping to get in converting these to headless components to get this down to a minimum number of renders and get this thing as performant as possible. And that's the goal of the library. Now, I know most people say, oh, you don't want to be over performant and all that. In a component library, yes, you do. You want to be as performant as you can, because any ill performance in your components is further ill performance in the user's project as well. So if your components aren't as performant as they can be, it's going to be an exponential problem, because it's going to kind of bleed into the user's project, user's website, whatever they're using it for. So yeah, we try to be as performant as possible, and I'm very much a stickler on what goes into the library. On my team, I'm the only person that can approve code, so I don't just go saying yes to everything. I do take a good look at it, and I'm very much a stickler on what goes in. And I hope my team isn't too upset about that, but that's also to help them too, because I know what I want, and I know what's performant, and that's what I try to do. So I'm hoping that this is a little bit more than just teaching. This is also kind of letting you know why I do what I do and what I do. That I am very much a stickler on releasing the best quality product possible. So that's going to be it for me. And yeah, I'll definitely see you guys some other time, and hopefully talk to you somewhere, more than likely X. But yeah, anywhere else you find me, hit me up, send me a message. I'll definitely reply. I seem to get all the notifications, so I'll definitely reply.